5 tips on how to get the girl you're thinking about, or the guy that you're thinking about. My name is Tolovite, and I'll be reflecting on both sides of being chosen and also being discarded. So I've been on both sides of the coins of being the stud, and I'll be reflecting on my own past knowledge and experience. So if you're interested in having a long-term relationship with someone specific, but don't know how, or you're struggling to attract a sexually committed relationship from scratch, or would like to learn how to maintain a new long-term relationship from the get-go, or you would like to learn how to maintain a long-term relationship, then this video is for you. And I'm not talking about if you are someone who has had a marriage. I'm just talking about someone who has had on and off relationships. I'm talking about if you're struggling to attract a partner, you're struggling to feel sexually desired, and your age is somewhere between the ages of 18 and 30, then I'm gonna share with you what I know. So who am I? I'm Tolovite, and I'm learning how to become a relationship dating coach, mentor, and perhaps even a counselor. And why should you trust me? Because I have been where I wanted to be in the past, and I do believe I have valuable knowledge and experience to share that would benefit anyone considering themselves to be a normal person. And you are sick and tired of the shiny, glittery stuff on YouTube that sounds really good and it sounds objectively, logically in line with what you might be thinking. But IRL, in real life, this shit doesn't really play out that well. And you would just like someone or something that is much easier to follow and much easier to understand without a bunch of editing fluff. If this is something that you're interested in, then feel free to subscribe to my channel and follow me along. If you've known me for some time, you would know that most of my videos are extremely raw. They're never usually filtered. I never usually have a script like I do now. I usually don't have bullet points, but on this occasion, I'm transitioning from being raw and just coming up with whatever comes to the top of my head to now having a lot more of a systemized approach to my sharing of knowledge. So in front of me on my computer, I've got a draft of a bunch of bullet points, and I'm going to share with you maybe 5 tips or so on how to attract and maintain a sexually attractive partner for the long term. And this video is going to be broken up into 3 sections. The first being the subject of attraction, the second section being the subject of maintenance, and the third section being a bonus psychology add-on. Now, as I said, because I am someone who's very used to just being raw and uploading on the go, I am transitioning away from that, becoming a lot more systemized. So these bullet points that I'm about to share with you, they are actually very raw in themselves, but they are still valid points that I've reflected on my own experience in the past. And so I have jotted these bullet points they are just raw, okay? So you will have to bear with me if you want to take away something from me. You might be very used to the perfectly written, perfectly scripted YouTube videos. Sure, they probably have their place. I could probably learn something from that too. But where I'm coming from right now and where I'm at this moment, and if you're interested in tagging along, my bullet points are just raw. So let's buckle up and let's learn what it takes to enter into a long-term sexually committed relationship. Starting off with our first major section, we're talking about attraction. And this is just an umbrella term, so don't take it too seriously. So I take it, you want to be in a relationship with someone who matters to you. You want to either be someone who's on the receiving end of being loved, or you want to love someone, or you just want that dynamic where it goes both ways. So, I'm not really too fussed on what this relationship dynamic looks like right now. And I imagine you're probably thinking of someone very specific. This is normally the case. We're normally thinking of someone very specific. And I'm going to tell you from my experience, the person you would probably actually want, or would be more likely to succeed in being in a relationship with, is probably the person you're actually more likely and happy to get rid of. And I'm not saying this is a blanket statement outright true. I'm just reflecting on some personal experience where I myself may have personally tried to get rid of certain people from my life, And it's these certain people who would end up being the ones who are more likely to commit to me. So I did have options. And you'll often hear a lot of YouTube videos saying, you need options, you need to create options. And it's like, well, you know what? Now that I think about it, I did have a lot of options, even though I never really felt like it a lot of the time. The people who you think aren't really your type, or the people you like, this, a friend, for example, a friend, you only see this person as a friend. And you put them in that category, you put them to the side. This person is actually the person who is more likely to be compatible with you. You might see that person as a sexual option for sexual gratification, and that's it. You might not see things developing with that person, but over time, things can if you allow them to. And I'm talking about maybe this is just a pen pal you have, or maybe this is a person who is sharing knowledge with you. You see this person maybe as your tutor, for example, and she might teach you something about a skill that you're wanting to learn that she knows how to teach you, and you would like to learn more, for example, like a very private arrangement. There is a reason why personal trainers and tutors and things like this, they have, I don't want to say a sense of authority, but they have a position that allows them to help you, right? If there's someone in your life who has the capacity to help you, you might find yourself developing feelings for this person because this person is helping you overcome a struggle, a personal struggle. And this overcoming of a personal struggle builds upon your existing pain. And if you're able to return that favor somehow, you're able to help them with some type of personal pain. It's a very interesting dynamic that develops, because helping someone with their personal pain, overcoming a struggle, it's extremely attractive. Remember how I said my bullet points are raw? Just bear with me, because I'm going to throw something completely random out there every once in a while, so do bear with me. So I've got another bullet point here just saying, relationship experience as a man does qualify you for interest in other girls. Like, other girls are going to be interested in you. If they see your relationship failing, they're still interested in you. If they see that you're already in a relationship, even more interesting. This is a general consensus. I don't like collectivist thinking. I don't like blanket statements per se, but there is a general consensus out there that does sort of confirm that women are more attracted to men who are pursued by other women. It does not work in the inverse correlation. So let's move on to the flirting stage. Flirting is the key to sparking attraction. If a woman does deny your advances, particularly flirting, there is often a reason behind it. i.e., she could be committed to someone else, or she doesn't have the time, or her focus and attention is much more obsessed with something else, and she kind of pushes the flirting and any other advancement to the side. You personally do this yourself in regards to a lot of other things, advertising. There's a lot of things out there trying to get your attention, and you will literally push things to the side because you're more focused on other things. You're more susceptible to being stimulated with certain emotions when you're in zombie mode. So is this 100% true? I can't really confirm that. But what I can sort of say is that a girl will go out of her own way to express interest or be with you. Now, if you're a girl watching this, typically there is a lot of similarities between men and women. I don't like to fall for the red pill analogies and label all women as this, and I don't really like to label all men as that. So there's certain things that we can look at in what I'm saying, and you can sort of apply this to whether it is a man or a woman. So a guy typically will still, generally speaking, go out of his own way to be with a girl. Remember, I'm talking from experience and self-reflection here. And a lot of the time, there's all these different factors that determine a person's style of behavior. So if this person is an absolute king who lives at the top with billions of dollars, there's no way you can expect him to go out of his own way to, save a damsel in distress per se. He can just pay his way to solve problems. So the approach there is completely different. But I'm just talking about normal people doing normal things. Rejection. I've been someone who has had to actually reject girls myself. I find this very interesting because I don't think a lot of men do reject girls. And when they do reject girls, it's a very uneasy feeling because you don't want to reject someone who's beautiful or who is a potential sexual partner. And I think a man who would normally reject a girl, it's not coming from a place of insecurity a lot of the time. I think it usually comes from the belief system and the capacity that the man has at the time. So if he's in a relationship, for example, he's thinking to himself he wants to be loyal to his current girlfriend. And this is the agreement that they have at that time. If he's single and he's rejecting a girl, it's probably because his heart is set on another girl, or he doesn't believe that he can get multiple women. He's very confined in the system that is leaning towards monogamy rather than traditional polygamy. Even though in a man's heart, he's probably more likely to want to be polygamous. Do I speak for everyone? No. But I suppose the reason I bring up the rejection here in terms of attraction is because as a guy, there's this feeling inside of you where it feels very ugly to reject an attractive woman or a somewhat attractive woman, even an average woman. If the woman is obese or, outside the scope of being traditionally attractive, then it is much more easier for a man to reject the girl. But if she is somewhat beautiful, he does have an internal feeling. It's like you don't want to outright say, I don't want to be with you, I'm not interested. It's just being direct like that is just kind of off-putting. And so I suppose why I mention this is because if you were a man, you can put yourself in the girl's shoes and imagine how off-putting it is to be so direct with someone, to reject someone. Because as a girl, can you imagine how ugly it might feel to constantly reject a man? Moving on, you don't have to be perfect to enter into a relationship. You can have a muffin top. You could have orange peel legs. Like I said, the person whom you're more likely to put in the category of placing to the side is the person who is more likely to be in a relationship with you for the long term. This person has flaws. And at some point, if you're able to develop a relationship with that person, this person is full of flaws, just like you are full of flaws. And I had this belief for the last probably 3+ or 4 or 5 years where I had to be perfect. Even in my YouTube videos, in my TikTok videos, I kept thinking to myself, I had to be perfect. I had to be a professional because if I'm not perfect, then no one will care. Because if I'm not perfect, I'm a failure, etc. But the truth is, that bar is almost impossible to reach. And just like when you're preparing to give birth to a child, as a parent, you're actually never, ever going to be ready, or the conditions are never going to be perfect before you have a child. And to really hammer down on this perfect type of attitude that you might think that you need or have, is if you were to look at people in less favorable socio-economical situations, these people tend to enter into relationships very easily. And it could be argued that the reason they enter into these relationships much more readily is because it's much more economically advantageous to do so. But I'm telling you, people who are just literally fucked up from like you look at them and you think, what the hell are they doing together? You see that they don't have to be perfect. They can still be an asshole. They can still be full of flaws, even traumas. Like literally reflecting on personal experience, you could be so dead set interested in someone who just hurts themselves. I'm not going to go deep into that, why that is the case. But that's just so interesting, is it not? To see that you don't have to be this perfect magical being in order to be in a relationship. Whereas on the other hand, people who actually are perfect are the people who end up failing at relationships. And I find this so interesting. You can have doctors. I don't even want to talk about the words. You can have like people in the top best positions. And these people have massive relationship problems. And I just find that so interesting. There's a YouTube video by this black guy. I don't know what his name is, I can't remember, but he's like, as a personal trainer, he reflected on how, in his experience, the very wealthy women who were married to very successful, wealthy men, etc., would often just seek to cheat on their husbands. And I don't want to throw the blanket statement out there that all women are cheaters. I'm not saying that. And I do personally believe, from my own personal standpoint, that the man has the responsibility to make sure that she's happy or he's giving her adequate attention. But it shows that a woman is not obliged or enticed to stay in or maintain a relationship with someone who is objectively perfect or objectively successful. In fact, the more likely you are aiming towards being successful or perfect, especially the perfect, you're more likely to end up ruining your relationship. Like I said, I've personally seen bogans living in absolute filth enter into relationships. And I suppose what's interesting is these people are often in alignment with like meets like. People are in alignment with those who are similar in nature to them. Moving on, let's say you have a belief that relationships are hard, relationships are difficult. Relationships can be entered into extremely easily. I'm talking so easily. I've personally met someone and made a girl my own girlfriend on the first day, maybe not the first day I met her, but it was very close to being on the first day. Like within the first week of me interacting with the girl, it wasn't even like within my proximity, it was like long distance, and I made her my girlfriend. Now over time, the relationship didn't work out, and I won't go into the detail of what that particular relationship looked like, but it's so interesting to reflect on my own experience of how easy relationships are to enter into. So just think about that. You don't have to be perfect to enter into a relationship. You don't have to be thinking that it's so hard to be in a relationship. It's actually super easy. The challenging part, I suppose, when it comes to the relationships, because there's this sexual attraction. You see someone who is oddly similar or to the traits that you'd like. You both feel this sense of sexual connection. But what kind of determines that the relationship will exist or not, officially? It will depend on each other's moods, your agreement at the time, and the terms and conditions of that arrangement being made. And the terms and conditions are subject to change. And this is why the relationship will break down eventually, because the terms and conditions are subject to change. And if you were to enter into a relationship without really establishing proper terms and conditions, then I suppose this is what can lead to the downfall of a relationship. And when I say terms and conditions, this can mean boundaries, but it's also important to understand what boundaries even mean. Boundaries aren't something that you impose on the other party. Boundaries are something that you impose upon yourself. And this is just one of those random things that I'm telling you on the go. Those raw statements that I'm telling you. Boundaries are something that you self-impose. Boundaries are not something that you enforce on the other party. And terms and conditions of the relationship, boundaries are just one of those things. You have goal alignment, you could say. You could have a sexual level of connection. Like there's all these different factors, hundreds of different factors, right? And one of these factors is long distance. I think a lot of people might be turned off from long distance relationships, but long distance relationships are very 100% achievable. They bring about their own form of pain and suffering, usually because there's a longing for the other party to be with you and they want you to be with them, etc. But I suppose what really guarantees that if you will be in a relationship together is you have to be mature enough and have the actual capacity and the willingness to show up in that relationship and actually do as you say. Will you be willing to move into another country with that person or vice versa? Do you have the money, like let's say 10 grand up front, to pay for a visa, for example? Have you actually gone and visited the other party? Moving on. Next bullet point. So, when I was growing up, I used to watch a lot of Bobby Rio's videos, and he always said things like, if a girl is thinking about when you're not around, that's when you want her over. And in my experience, this is a real thing. However, it's not something I'd actively say with 100% certainty. This is the absolute guarantor that determines if you're going to be in a happy relationship or a relationship at all. But what I will say is people will stalk your Instagram when you're not around. And why does this matter? Because what you do or what you feel in secret is relevant. Do you masturbate to that girl's ass in the photo that she sent you? Does this girl or even the guy get drunk just thinking about you because they miss you so much? It does matter, because how this person ultimately feels about you controls you. It controls them. Now, ideally, we would like to be in control of our own feelings, but a lot of the time I think we get very immersed in and carried away with our own feelings, and we kind of let and allow those feelings to control us because we're so immersed in them. We identify and become one with the emotion and the feeling, and we let that carry us away. And it's very difficult to get away from that feeling. And it's very difficult to ignore. You definitely can't just wave a magic wand and make those feelings disappear, even when you actually try to, because those feelings, even if you suppress them, they'll actually gnaw at you even more. And emotions are energy. Energy in motion. You might have heard of this before. And energy seeks to express itself. It has to be expressed. So we're going to move away from more of the flirting. So we're going to move away from the flirting a bit more and just talk about something I call intermittent exposure. You don't want to be away from a girl 24/7, but you also don't want to be hanging around her 24/7. Constantly seeking to be with a girl 24/7 gives no breathing space, and it will cause the relationship to prematurely collapse under suffocation and under lack of self-restraint. Self-restraint is incredibly attractive, especially coming from a man, but even from a woman. If a woman is showing self-restraint, that's sexually attractive. I'd say if she was to pick and choose whoever she wanted to be with, and she was literally hanging around you as a guy, and she chooses you, it does make you feel good. But if you are someone who beats yourself up all the time, if you are someone who beats yourself up all the time and you're asking yourself, why did she choose such a piece of shit like me? You are only going to contaminate that relationship. Moving away from that, let's talk about what it means to be in a relationship by just being friends and just talking. When you do talk with the other party, the member of the opposite sex, I think that the discussions around having a relationship together should not really be a primary thing that you talk about most of the time. It should be maybe like 1%. In fact, I'd actually say it's 100% okay to talk about things or even do things that go against each other's beliefs. This creates tension, anger, and a desire to change the other person. So whenever someone says something political to you, I guarantee when you hear the other person speak on the political takes, you're either going to feel negative or positive, or maybe sometimes neutral on that person's perspective. And no matter what this other party is saying or doing, you're going to have either a negative, neutral, or positive variation of feelings. It could even be mixed feelings. But that's the thing. It stimulates those feelings. So it's very, I say, okay to talk about things that you're in a completely different realm with. The only thing is, I must warn you, is that you must not trespass against the other party's bodily integrity or their agency. So I'm not going to talk about the repercussions of what that looks like here, but it loses so much respect for you if you were to do that. If someone does this to you, you feel oddly, like you just, you do not feel good about this. Moving forward, talking about a relationship directly puts too much pressure on the dating and does distract you from what it means to be human. So you can be confident in what you want. You can be confident, hey, I like a relationship. This is what I like, etc. But don't go throwing that and putting that on the other party as if this is a bunch of check boxes that they have to fulfill for you. Another thing about being friends, you can't be in an intimate relationship with someone if you're not friends with them. I've seen this and experienced this. In order to have a fairly intimate sexual relationship with the person that you're with or interested in, you have to actually be friends with them. Because if you're in a relationship with them and you're not even their friend, then what are you? And when I personally tried to separate myself away from that in my past experiences, I don't think that really ended well for me. And I would actually say it's actually more important to invest in the friendship than it is the relationship. And this doesn't mean being content with the friend zone. This doesn't mean lacking self-respect. And I definitely do not mean placing your value in the entity of the relationship, the friendship itself. Because there's some people out there who literally go out of their way to make it a big deal that you have friends. That should not be a big deal. Because when you make it a big deal, it just puts way too much weight on the friendship itself even. Side note, now I'm not speaking for every girl, but when a girl says that there is a guy in the distance and she says he's just a friend, that person that she's talking about is actually her just saying, this is a guy I have already had sexual history with, or I'm keeping him on the sidelines and having the door open just in case I desire to have sex with him later down the track as a sexual option. Let's be for real here. Like I was saying earlier, people who you put on the sidelines are actually the people who are more likely to be in a relationship with you, because eventually these people worm their way into your life and you sort of entangle, there's this gradual, extremely gradual growth that happens. And girls are 100% just as sexually active as males, if not more so. They just don't express it as openly as the male population does. It is more behind closed doors, but behind closed doors, women are far more sexually active. And you put boys and girls in the same room, they will elicit sexual desires within each other, guaranteed. Of course, unless there's some other looming factor. And when I say looming factor, let's imagine Mr. Beast saying, I'm going to put this dude here and this girl here in the same room for 30 days, and they're both challenging each other, competing against each other to win $100,000. Of course, these two parties aren't going to be seeking a relationship with each other because on the forefront of their mind, they're trying to win $100,000. Or they probably already have some other partner. And sexual patterns of behavior, obviously you might know this, but they are controlled by a personal belief system and a skill level, which is the capacity to execute, but also the shadow self. And the shadow self is something like a Carl Jung term where you have an alternative version of you, like the slightly more evil side, the suppressed side, the dark side of you behind the mask, that has a desire to express the opposite of what you would normally be doing. Moving on to the next section of this video, maintenance. How do I know that what I'm talking about is true? So you might be questioning whether or not I just pulled this information out of my ass and whether this is something that you can actually rely on as accurate and actually implement any of this stuff for yourself if it makes sense for you. So where does my actual information come from? Most of my information comes from personal experience, books, and self-reflection, and a lot of training that I think was unfortunately just very mixed in the results. So you're not obligated to trust the information that I'm sharing with you. However, I am astounded by my own personal experience by reflecting on parts of my own personal history. I'm able to discover key differences between creative and destructive patterns of behavior in my own past relationships. So now, what is a number one bar to entry into a relationship? So relationship coaches like Bobby Greer and several others might say having the ability to walk away makes you more attractive, and this might be true, but would you say with 100% certainty that this is the number one thing that would guarantee you a real heartfelt relationship? Some people might say the number one guaranteeing factor to have a successful relationship is communication, and apparently this is actually being scientifically proven to be bullshit. In my personal take on this, I would say the number one factor to entering into a relationship is the other person selling themselves a washing machine. You being the washing machine. You being a suitable washing machine. And this is an example I came up with where it's very easy to understand the concept if you really look at it. Like, if you had to try and sell a washing machine to people, 99% of the time, the people who you're trying to sell a washing machine to are not going to be interested in buying a washing machine. There's only like 1% of people at any really given time who are interested in buying a washing machine. And there's a few factors. Maybe they want to upgrade. Maybe the washing machine sucks. Maybe they don't have one and they need one. So there's a bit of pain there. There's different psychological factors going on there. But the person who ultimately buys, they make the decision to buy a washing machine. They visualize themselves experiencing having a washing machine. This is manifestation 101. You do not first do something without first thinking about it, without first, like, your thoughts precede the actions. A person does not be in a relationship with you without them first having the preconceived thought of experiencing this. This doesn't guarantee that the thought itself will come into actual fruition, because a person will often weigh a bunch of pros and cons. And if they've visualized in the mind that the cons outweigh the pros, or the pain is just too high, then they're going to choose some other type of thought process. They're going to visualize having some other experience down the track. They might visualize themselves going around that block. They might visualize themselves turning a different street. But it is this visualization process, this preconceived thought pattern, that I do believe determines if someone's going to be in a relationship with you. Like, you cannot argue with that. There is no way you can prove me wrong there. Even when relationships end, the reason they end, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was pre-thought. Thoughts preceded the actions. And on that note, what would be the number one guarantee for the destruction of a relationship? Now, I could say that the ego, which is an overinflated sense of self-importance, but I would say that's not actually the number one cause for a breakdown of a relationship. Because in my own personal experience and witnessing, people in relationships often will choose people who will actually be just assholes. I would say the number one thing that guarantees the downfall of a relationship is not growing, like the lack of growth, the lack of adapting. This means being in a fixed mindset. The fixed mindset is deadly, by the way. It means not learning. You have to love to learn. You have to love to learn. It means being stuck in your own belief systems. Even as a Christian myself, you would try to kind of inflict, I suppose, your belief systems onto the other party who had no exposure to that in their own upbringing. And it rubs off on them. It's very hard to integrate that system into another system. And then you would find yourself not being able to tolerate a system error, and there'd be a malfunction, a meltdown. The number one thing that destroys relationships is not growing or adapting. And adapting does not mean compromising or self-abandonment, because if you wear one black shoe and one brown shoe in order to be a relationship, you can read the book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. that is worse than not participating at all. Adapting means pivoting around obstacles, growing. Well, let's move on to the bonus section here, universal laws and psychology. And of course, if you've been following me so far, yes, all these bullet points are super random, but like I said, bear with me because I am personally transitioning away from raw to structured. So psychology and universal laws. If you have no idea how to start a business from scratch, or if you have no idea how one even operates behind the scenes, just know this. In order to get what you want, which is like money, you want money, obviously, you have to give what the other party wants. Even a job structure supports this. You can't get the money. You can't, like, this is a belief system. Of course, you can get money through other means, but generally there's this arrangement, this mental block, this agreement, where in order to get what you want, the other party must also receive what they want. So if you're teaching someone a skill, or if your business offers a certain product, if you have the product, they have the cash. It's sort of like this exchange. And I do believe the relationship is no different, because the relationship, it does technically on a fundamental level function as a transaction. I think people just don't like to hear that or see it that way, or they really don't like to feel that. But what this means is that if you want a relationship, whether you want to enter into one or maintain one, you need to offer something in order to receive something. There's this universal juxtaposed law where you sort of have to give and receive, right? In order for something to live, something must die. So you must sacrifice something for something to be given life. In business and earning money, this is probably a lot more easy to see and visualize. But in the relationship, it's a bit more nuanced and complex. It's just like, what exactly is the relationship being, like, what exactly is the transaction? And if I had to observe with people who are just hoarders or even uneducated people who are not perfect, who end up being in relationships, like I said, there is this self-visualized road that one looks at, and they make the decision of whether or not they're going to buy that washing machine for their house or not, and you or the other party being that washing machine. And then there's this agreement. Well, the washing machine has to give me clean, fresh clothes, and in exchange, the washing machine gets to be in my house, and I'll invest in it. Typically speaking, I think it would be fairly obvious that most men want sex, and women want some type of commitment and resources. This is the standard norm and functioning behavioral standard, but for the sake of a mental agreement, it does have to be consensual. So you can't unilaterally declare someone as your girlfriend, for example, unless you have the extreme leverage for that. Well, that's precisely what she wants. For there to be that mental agreement, both parties need to actually visualize themselves choosing that road of buying each other's washing machine. And I suppose if you yourself were the washing machine, you would have to satisfy that other person's scratch, that other person's desire. Like if both of you are offering technically unequal but both valuable goods, a hammer and a screwdriver, both being vastly different but both also valuable. The deal is like, would you give me commitment and attention, etc., if I give you sex, for example? But this also does mean, do I see myself valuing that other person's attention? Does this washing machine sell itself as something that is worthy of being given attention? Let's talk about manipulation for a second. Manipulation itself isn't a bad thing, by the way, because some people might think that I'm talking about manipulation here. Manipulation isn't a bad thing, but I think what most people mean when they talk about manipulation is it's when they feel misled or cheated on in a deal. So if I sell you a chocolate cookie for $100 You might buy it. You could potentially buy that cookie. It really depends on how much you value the cookie and the experience and the feeling you'd like. But you would be fairly outraged if you were to learn that it was just a normal cookie from Subway. In your mind, the deal was supposed to be a special cookie. Let's talk about flights. If you were at the airport and you missed your flight, but the airline doesn't inform you and makes zero effort to communicate a change of your itinerary, you would feel pretty pissed. You might know that it is your responsibility to be on top of the ever-changing flight schedules, so the onus is on your shoulders by default, and this is the agreement, the mental agreement. So if you were to normally miss your flight, it would be your fault. And normally, because of this, you are able to accommodate and adapt to the changes, to the environment, to the system that is agreed upon. Because you're kind of forced to make this agreement. Because if you don't make this agreement, you know the consequences will carry an emotional toll. But in the event the airline made no effort and offered no compensation for your loss, you would feel outraged, manipulated, and lied to, because the airline would have ultimately made the mistake of not living up to the agreement on their end. And this is why insurance companies are so annoying to deal with, because they never usually hold up their end of the agreement. In your mind, there's an agreement. Insure my tools. Your tools get stolen, the insurance company doesn't live up to the agreement, because they're like, oh, well, we need proof, like a photo of the missing tool, before and after shots, things like that. Little clauses in the agreement that they never drew your attention to, and just things that you're just not really prepared for in the real world. And so these insurance companies always get away with shit like that. Car insurance, not as severe, but other types of insurance, yeah. And there's various levels to so-called manipulation too. So the more intense it is, the more of an emotional toll it's going to bear on you. So this is my ending statement. I don't want this to be just another educational video that you walk away from thinking, oh, that was nice, I learned something new, or worse, I'm sorry if my video came across as very raw and just disorganized. I don't want this to be just another educational video that you walk away from thinking that, oh, that was nice, I learned something new, and then just continue on with your life like nothing really happened. I want this video to really impact the way you see yourself interacting in your own romantic relationships moving forward, because I'm still on my own journey of walking on the road of hot coals, because I want to learn from my own mistakes, and because I want to be the reason why you find what you're looking for in a relationship, instead of someone else who misguides you and makes you feel like shit. If this video resonates with you, feel free to give me a follow on social media, or reach out to me directly if you'd like a more personalized perspective on your situation.